Ladies and gentlemen, there are moments in life when the outer form of things collapses. Relationships dissolve, dreams disappear, health fails, plans fall apart. In such moments, we may ask, why? Or more accurately, why me? The invitation is not to wait for the turn, but to recognize it now, in this breath, in this silence, in this moment, because what God turns you toward is not something later, it is something eternal. Transformation does not always arrive in the form of dramatic change. More often, it comes quietly, subtly, like a shift in the wind or a softening in your gaze toward life. When we speak of transformation through stillness, we are not talking about something the ego can grasp or manufacture. Rather, we are pointing to a profound inner movement, a turning that occurs not by striving or achieving, but by allowing. There is a misconception in the modern world that change must be active and visible, that it must be something you do. But the most lasting transformation is not something the mind accomplishes. It is something that unfolds when the mind gets out of the way, and that unfolding is often facilitated through stillness. Stillness is not the absence of movement. It is the space in which all movement arises and subsides. It is the ground beneath your thoughts, emotions, and experiences. Most people pass through life without ever truly touching the stillness because the mind is always in motion, seeking, judging, labeling, resisting. And yet, in those rare moments when all that noise quiets, even briefly, something extraordinary becomes possible. In stillness, you become aware of a deeper dimension of yourself, not the personality, not the roles, not the story of you and me and my life, but the awareness itself. The presence that notices all things without becoming them. This awareness is where God begins to turn you, not by changing who you are, but by revealing who you've always been underneath the layers of thought and identity. When you are still, you are no longer in conflict with the moment. You are not trying to escape, improve, or control it. You are simply present. And in that presence, transformation becomes natural. Not because you have done anything, but because you have stopped interfering with the deeper intelligence of life that already knows what to do. This is how God works, not with loud declarations or thunderbolts of clarity, but through the gentle dissolution of resistance. When you become still, the noise of the ego lessens, and what remains is pure receptivity. And in that receptivity, you are turned not toward some new version of your story, but toward the timeless space in which your story is being told. The irony is that the more we chase transformation, it is only when we stop chasing, when we stop striving to fix ourselves or our lives, that true change becomes possible. Not change as a movement from one state to another, but change as a deepening into the eternal. God does not need your effort to transform you. God needs your openness, your stillness, your surrender. Consider a seed buried in the earth. It does not become a tree by force of will. It becomes a tree because it rests in the dark in the quiet soil, trusting the intelligence of life to bring it forth. So too with your spirit. It does not require noise or striving. It requires stillness, patience, and presence. In the space of stillness, all things are made new, not because they are replaced, but because they are seen without the filter of resistance. The pain, the confusion, even the fear, they do not have to be eliminated. They only need to be met with presence, and in that meeting, they lose their power to define you. That is the beginning of transformation. That is the quiet miracle of God turning your inner landscape, not through thunder, but through silence, not through effort, but through stillness. Pain is a universal part of the human experience. No one escapes it. We encounter it in many forms: loss, disappointment, illness, rejection, uncertainty. At first glance, pain appears to be a mistake, an interruption in the flow of what should be a peaceful life. But if we look more deeply, if we are willing to stay present with our pain rather than escape it, we begin to see something unexpected. Pain is not just something that happens to us. It is something that can awaken us. There is a certain kind of clarity that pain brings, a raw honesty. When the usual comforts no longer work, when distractions lose their appeal, and when the stories we tell ourselves no longer soothe us, we are left with something more essential. Pain strips away illusion. It removes what is unnecessary. In that rawness, in that silence after the storm, something sacred begins to stir. What if pain is not a punishment but a portal? When you stop running from your pain and begin to meet it with awareness, something profound occurs. You step out of the role of victim and into the space of observer. Not detached or numb, but present. You begin to see that pain is not your enemy. It is a messenger. It brings with it an invitation, not to fix it or even to understand it fully, but simply to be with it. This being with pain is not something the mind understands easily. The mind wants answers, solutions, escape routes. But the soul, the deeper intelligence within you, is not interested in escape. It is interested in awakening. And awakening happens when you stop resisting what is. In those moments of deep pain, when the outer world offers no relief, you are brought face to face with the present moment. You are no longer able to project happiness into some distant future. All that remains is now. And in that a now, as uncomfortable as it may be, lies the potential for profound inner shift. Pain focuses your attention. It brings you into your body, into your breath, into what is real. It can humble the ego, dissolve pride, and soften the walls you've built around your heart. And it asks you to surrender, not as defeat, but as a sacred yielding, a letting go of control, a releasing into something greater. This is where God enters, not as a concept, not as a belief, but as presence. When the mind has exhausted itself trying to figure everything out and the heart is laid bare, a deeper presence emerges. You may not even have words for it, but you feel it, a quiet strength, a stillness beneath the chaos, an inexplicable peace that has nothing to do with circumstances. God doesn't take your pain away in the way you might expect. Instead, God uses your pain to draw you inward, to pull your awareness out of the future, out of the past, and into this moment, because it is only in this moment that true transformation occurs. And as you sit with your pain, not judging it, not suppressing it, but simply witnessing it, you begin to notice it changes. Sometimes slowly, sometimes suddenly. The edges soften, the weight lessens. You begin to see what the pain was pointing to. Not just what hurt, but what needed to be seen, what needed to be healed, what needed to be released. So pain is not the end. It is the doorway, the place where form breaks and essence emerges. The moment where your false sense of self begins to dissolve, revealing something more enduring, more whole. Pain is a teacher, a purifier, a threshold, and if you are willing to walk through it with open eyes and an open heart, you will find on the other side not only relief, but awakening. And in that awakening, you'll realize it wasn't the pain itself that changed you, it was your presence with it. And in that presence, God was always there. Much of what we identify with in life is rooted in the ego, the collection of thoughts, roles, memories, and labels that make up our sense of me. We say, this is my job, my success, my failure, my reputation, my pain. And through these attachments, we build a self-image that feels solid, real, and important. But there comes a moment, sometimes through loss, crisis, or deep stillness, when this image begins to crack. And in that cracking, something deeper emerges. What we thought was the end turns out to be the beginning, not of a new ego story, but of a return to essence. God will turn your ego into essence, not by force, but by gently revealing the truth, that who you are is not what you have, what you do, or what others think of you. Who you are is not the voice in your head that constantly judges, compares, and fears. Who you are is the awareness that hears that voice, the space in which thoughts come and go, the still presence behind every experience. When the ego is strong, we cling to form. We define ourselves by our roles, mother, artist, entrepreneur, healer, and by our achievements or even our suffering. We mistake the story of our life for our identity, but the story is always changing. And so, when change inevitably comes, when we lose the job, the relationship ends, the recognition fades, we often feel like we are losing ourselves. But what if that loss is grace in disguise? What if God is not taking something away from you, but peeling something away for you, not to diminish you, but to return you to what cannot be lost? Ego is always future or past focused. It is built on memory and fueled by anticipation. But your essence lives only in the now, Vardhanan Bao. It doesn't need approval. It doesn't need success. It doesn't even need understanding. It just is. And it is in stillness, in surrender, that essence begins to reintroduce itself to you. When you are no longer striving to be someone, you discover the peace of simply being. And that being is not passive, it is deeply alive. There is clarity, wisdom, and compassion in it that the ego could never manufacture. It is not self-centered, but naturally connected to the whole. It doesn't need to prove itself because it knows, without thinking, that it already is enough. The shift from ego to essence is not a dramatic conversion. It's a gentle remembering, a return to the truth that was always present beneath the noise. God turns your need to control into trust, your fear of not being enough into the realization that you were never separate from love itself. From love itself. You may still play roles in life. You may still have ambitions and dreams, but you no longer are those roles. You no longer need those outcomes to feel whole. This is freedom, not the absence of responsibility, but the absence of identification. From this place of essence, you respond to life instead of reacting to it. You feel emotions, but you're no longer consumed by them. You experience thoughts, but you're no longer defined by them. You live in the world, but you are not of it in the same way anymore. There is a lightness to your being because you're no longer carrying the burden of a false self. This is the gift of God, turning your ego into essence, not by punishing you, but by waking you. By allowing the forms you cling to dissolve, so you can remember what is formless, eternal, and unshakably whole within you. And once you've tasted this essence, even briefly, life is never quite the same. The search ends. The striving quiets, because you have come home, not to a new identity, but to the timeless truth of who you already are. There is a quiet truth that often goes unnoticed in the rush of everyday life. Transformation is not something that happens later. It is something that happens now, in presence. In presence. The power of presence is not flashy or loud. It is subtle, often overlooked, because it does not belong to the world of form where change is measured in visible results and outward progress. Presence is the still, spacious awareness in which all things arise. And it is within this awareness that God begins to turn your life, not by altering the circumstances, but by shifting your relationship with them. Most people live in a state of psychological time. That is, they are mentally located in the past or in the future. The past holds regrets, identity, trauma, and memory. The future holds hopes, fears, goals, and anxieties. The present, meanwhile, is treated as a mere stepping stone, a brief moment to endure on the way to something better. And yet, this moment, this breath, this now, is the only place where life actually happens. The only place where healing is possible. The only place where God meets you. To be present does not mean to withdraw from life, but to enter it more fully. When you are present, you begin to see things clearly, not through the filters of judgment or comparison, but through the clarity of awareness itself. This presence is not something you create. It is something you realize. It's always here, beneath the noise of thought. God does not wait for you in some imagined future when you've solved all your problems, achieved all your goals, or finally figured it out. God is not holding back peace, or love, or clarity until you become someone more perfect. The turning of your life begins the moment you stop fleeing the now and allow yourself to be exactly where you are, as you are. Not because the now is always pleasant, but because it is real. And reality, when met with awareness, becomes sacred. There may still be pain. There may still be uncertainty, regretfulness, but when you are present, you no longer resist what is. You stop pushing life away. And in that acceptance, something beautiful happens. Space opens. You begin to sense a deeper intelligence at work. You start to feel that life is not against you. That even the discomfort is here to teach you something, to draw you inward, to awaken you. The power of presence is not about escaping difficulty. It's about finding freedom within it. It is the ability to sit with what is and not be consumed by it, to allow emotions without identifying with them, to notice thoughts without believing every one of them. In presence, you remember that you are not the storm. You are the sky it moves through. And so, when we say a God will turn your we must understand. The turning begins not when your external situation changes, but when you awaken to what is always available within you. When you bring your full attention to this moment, without trying to manipulate it or rush past it, you are aligned with the divine. You are aligned with life itself. The invitation is simple, yet profound. Stop running. Be still. Come home to now. Be still. Come home to now. Because the turning you long for, the clarity, the peace, the transformation, is not a distant miracle. It is here, in the softness of this breath, in the space between thoughts, in the silence underneath all noise. This is where God turns your confusion into wisdom, your struggle into surrender, your resistance into trust, not by changing the moment, but by changing how you are with the moment. That is the power of presence. That is where the sacred begins. Ew? And so, ladies and gentlemen, we begin to see that the turning we so often seek from God is not a change in the outer world alone, but a profound shift within. It is not always about changing the situation, it is about changing our relationship with it. God will turn your pain, your ego, your fear, your uncertainty, not by force, but by gently inviting you into presence. Through stillness, through surrender, through silence, you begin to awaken to a deeper reality, one where pain becomes a teacher, loss becomes liberation, and presence becomes the gateway to peace. What once looked like an ending reveals itself as a sacred beginning, not a return to the past or a leap into the future, but a deep arrival into now. This turning is not loud, but it is powerful. Not immediate in form, but eternal in truth. It is not something you earn, but something you remember, because the divine turning is not toward some distant goal. It is always, always turning you toward yourself. So walk gently, breathe deeply, be present. Be present. God is not waiting at the end of your journey. God is here, turning you, even now. Thank you.